Hey, what's up YouTube? Dan the Fix-It Man. Got another quick video here for you. I'm going to show you how to change your rear brake pads on a 2011 Honda Pilot. I'm also going to show you how you can change the brake rotor, even though we're not going to change this one out. I am going to take it off, and I'll show you why I'm going to take it off. The parking brake is inside this disc drum combo here, and what happens on these Hondas a lot of times, in a lot of cars, if you run your parking brake a lot or leave it on while driving, it will wear down, and it creates a lot of brake dust inside the drum here, and it squeaks. And so here that's what we're hearing right now. Take a listen. I'll show you once we get the caliper and everything off and out of the way. Now, I already did the other side, and that was the case. We just had a lot of dust inside there, and once we took it apart, cleaned it out, and put it back on, the noise is gone. So pretty common. It happens a lot with my Tundra too, so every once in a while I've got to pull off the rear drums and clean all that brake dust out of there. So if you're just doing the pads though and you don't have this issue, you can just pull this caliper off, and I'll show you how easy it is to do that. The first thing we are going to do is pull this off, and before we do, I like to push the caliper piston back in by wedging a screwdriver in here to push the brake fluid backwards through the system. You can also just open this bleeder here and push the caliper piston back in, and essentially you'd be cycling the old fluid out this way. In our case, I'm just going to push it back up through the system into the master cylinder. Just remember to pop the hood and make sure you have enough room inside the master cylinder so that you're not going to overflow and make a big mess under the hood. So let's go take a quick look and make sure we've got room for that. Now here's our brake master cylinder. You can see it's still below the max line there. So we're okay to push the fluid back up into this master cylinder. A lot of people ask me if you need to take the top off when you do this. I have not noticed really much of a difference in the resistance when doing so. So I will not usually take the lid off. Brake fluid absorbs moisture in the air. It's hygroscopic. The moisture is what causes it to degrade and go bad. Now there's lots of ways to push the caliper piston back in. This is just a single piston caliper here in the back, but I usually just will take a big screwdriver, just a flathead screwdriver, put it in here. I'm actually wedging it into the front of the pad. You could also use a pry bar, and then just pull that towards you. You can see that steady pressure will just push that caliper piston back in. I'm going to shift here in between the pad and the rotor and finish that off. So that's all the way back in. Now we've got lots of room in there for the new pad material. Now I'm going to loosen and remove these two slide pin bolts. Those are 12 millimeter. All right, and then just take the caliper off. Now you can hang this up or hook it on somewhere, but this has got a nice little perch right there. If I can just set it right up here out of the way, it's up on that sway bar there. As long as it's not going to fall or dangle from the brake line, that's fine. We can pull the old brake pads out. You can see this one, that actually was starting to squeal. It was probably some of our noise, but I can still hear a lot of brake dust inside here. So we're going to go ahead and take that off and clean it out. We're going to pull off this hardware here. The new pads usually come with new hardware, just these abutment clips. If you have to reuse them, I guess you could clean them up real well, but it's better to replace them. All right, and then we're going to loosen and remove these two caliper bracket bolts here. They're pretty tight. These are a 17 millimeter. It's a good idea to have one hand on this while you loosen it so it doesn't fall. On most Hondas, they screw the rotor on with these little screws, and they're really kind of a pain to get out if you don't have the right tool. So this is what I've been using. This is a Vessel Impacta number 3. I believe it's a JIS, Japanese industry standard. These are not Phillips. They look like Phillips, but they're not. But this is an impact screwdriver. Basically, you hit the end, and that actually provides a little bit of counterclockwise ratcheting movement as you hit. So we just get these in here. Just grab a little sledge or mini Tanya Harding here, and just give that a few whacks. Okay, that did it. I also want to point out this little piece right here came off. That goes on the other side here where the bracket is mounted, and I'll show you that here in a minute, but not a big deal if it falls out. Let's get this other one. There we go. Now I should also make mention you need to have the parking brake off or you'll never get this rotor off. By the way, these screws, very prone to stripping, or, you know, a lot of people end up having to drill them out. I'll get a link in the description to some replacements that I found, also made by the company Mission. So if you end up having to drill these out, not to fret, I'll get a link and you can pick some of those up. Not a bad idea to have a few on hand in case that does happen. Now, a lot of times the rotor will just come right off. Yep, we're lucky it's going to. But if it doesn't, you can see that it's got these other threaded holes here. You can put another bolt in there on either side and just turn that in, and it'll act like a press or just kind of pull that off. But in this case, it's coming right off. So, and you can see how that's full of all that dust inside there. That dust makes a lot of noise, a lot of squeaking, and that's what's going on. So we'll get that cleaned out. Here, the parking brake shoes still look like they're in great condition, so we're not going to mess with that. But I am going to clean them before I put this back on. I'm just putting some cardboard underneath here so I can catch any of the debris that comes down. But let's just gonna spray these with brake cleaner. Just knocking out some more of that dust. Try not to spray too much brake clean right on the pad material itself. Just making sure we knock anything out. Occasionally you'll get a little rock in there or something, and that will grind inside your brake drum and make some squeaking noises. But I think we just had excessive dust, and I'm cleaning out the inside of the drum here too. But if you are changing the rotor, just make sure you clean off all the packing grease, and then just put it right back on. Then we can put these screws back in. The same screwdriver here, the impact screwdriver to remove them, also works to put them back on. I'm sure there's a torque spec on this, but I don't know what it is. I'm not going to use a torque wrench on these, just going to make them as snug as we can. You can hear it's already a lot quieter. We don't have any squealing or squeaking. You can still hear the shoes making a little bit of contact, and that's okay, but it's not squeaking like it was before. Now, before we put this back on, I'm going to get it cleaned up, and I'm also going to pull out these slide pins and clean and re-grease them. So we can just hit this with a wire brush or something similar. All right, that looks pretty good. Now we're gonna pull out and re-grease each of the slide pins and just kind of hold on the rubber boot there, pull and twist that out. Just wipe off the old grease. Sometimes I'll put these back in once or twice just to try to get any more of that extra grease out of there. And then this is what we're gonna use. This is caliper grease by Versachem. It's a pretty blue color. Just get some of that on the slide pin. And pop it right back in. And when you push these in, just make sure that they spin freely. If there's any air in there, you almost have to squeeze that boot a little bit and burp that air out. Same with this one here. And we don't want too much. I think that'll work. All right, that looks good. Now lately I've also been putting some grease underneath where the brake hardware goes, or those retainer clips. It's not necessarily as a lubricant, more of a protectant, and it just kind of keeps those from corroding underneath. Probably got a little carried away here, but that just seems to protect that from corrosion, or keeps it from corroding. That's less likely to bind up if you don't have any buildup of or corrosion or anything in there. Now here's our new hardware. We can clip this in place. I will point out, I didn't notice this until I just looked it up online, but the hardware in these is different for the top and bottom. The bottom one has this little tab right here, and the top one does not. Probably doesn't make much of a difference, but that's how it's supposed to go. I just looked it up, and that's how they have it. So bottom one has this little metal tab. This doesn't have anything. Again, don't know if it'll make much of a difference, but that's how we're gonna do it. I usually put some of this same grease in these little channels right here where the pad slides. And I know that's probably seems a little excessive, but that just prevents it from getting bound up. You don't want to use too much grease because it'll attract dust and whatnot, but this is good to go and ready to put back on now. Like I mentioned, this little circle here came off. You can see this one didn't come off, but they go right inside that, so the bracket slides in front of them. Now before I put these bolts back in, on these caliper bracket bolts, I do usually like to use a little bit of thread locker now. I didn't used to, but I've noticed that most manufacturers do have some thread lock on that, or on these bolts at least. So these are torqued pretty snug. These are, I believe, 65 foot-pounds, but just a little bit of thread locker on those bolts will help hold that in place and keep it snug. But this bracket's ready to go back on now. Just be careful not to knock those little washers loose. Let's get these started. Now we'll just snug those up real quick. And the torque spec I found on these is 65 foot-pounds. Now these little noisemakers are not on these pads, or they don't come attached, so we just need to put that on. It's a simple clip, just clips in place, and that goes on the inside, on the bottom on these. Now we're also going to brush the back of the pads with some of this brake grease. That just really does help cut down on some of the vibrations and noise that will make squeaks, and I always put a little bit on the ends too. And then these just kind of slide into place like that. Same with the outside pad, just a nice little thin layer there. And at the ends, just make sure you don't get any grease on the friction surface of the pad or on the rotor. If you do, just clean it off. Now you saw when I took off the pads, we didn't have any of these return springs, but they come in the kit and there's holes here, so I'm going to go ahead and use them. This is the tricky part though. You do need to maybe kind of hold these together with one hand while you put these in. Okay. There we go. Yeah, wow, that really just wants to push out. That's okay, that's what it's supposed to do. And then let's just bring the caliper down. All right. Sometimes I'll brush some caliper grease on the inside of that caliper, but I've got plenty on the pad, so I'm not gonna worry about that. Now these have like a flat spot that lines up with the caliper here too, these slide pins, so that when you tighten them down, the slide pins won't spin. So we just get those started, and then we'll get them torqued to the spec, which is, I believe, 27. I'm just gonna snug them down here with the ratchet here. This is a high-speed Milwaukee 3/8 drive. Been using that a lot lately, really like it. All right, and then the torque spec on these slide pin bolts is 27 foot-pounds. By the way, this is the gear wrench, torque wrench I'm using. It's the 85062. It's a great one, I really like it. And you're done. Now just remember, before you head out, to step on the brake pedal several times to push the caliper piston back out, pressing that pad up against the rotor where it needs to be. When you do this, however, don't press the pedal all the way to the floor. That can damage the seals in your master cylinder. Just press it about halfway down several times until it feels firm. And then remember to double check the master cylinder. Make sure that brake fluid is at the appropriate level as well. I hope you liked the video. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you don't mind. That does help me out. I'll get a link in the description to some of the parts and tools used in the video as well. Thanks so much for watching, and good luck.